Hi everyone, I did it. It's the 31st day of August. It is the last day of the Sealey Challenge. And I have a really good one to finish up on. So let me take you back to 2015. I had just started to be really interested in poetry. So visiting family in New York, and I would go quite often to a place called Poet's House, which is like a poetry library / community center. Amazing place. And whatever they had on, I'd go and listen to. And they had this emerging fellowship program every year. And that year I happened to be around when they had one of the final readings, as far as I can remember. And they were very young, very cool people reading poetry. The atmosphere was electric because it was so supportive of each other. They were clicking their fingers and they were kind of cheering each other on. And so fast forward to, now I'm doing the Sealey Challenge. And I come across, I decide, actually before the Sealey Challenge, I decided to do the Penguin Poets, to do a few Penguin Poet reviews. And I come across a book, it's brand new, by Paul Tran, All the Flowers Kneeling. And I'm looking at Paul Tran's photo and there's just something so familiar about them. And sure enough, Paul Tran was one of the emerging poets in that fellowship group. I couldn't believe it when I actually looked it up. I'll leave a link. It's the most adorable photo of these little baby poets. So there was Paul Tran, and then I see that I was researching him, and I saw that he was being interviewed by another young poet who had also been published this year, also 2022. His name was Yan Yi. And I thought, is it possible? I look up, yes, Yan Yi, also in the group. So then I'm doing the Sealey Challenge, and I saw, a while back, because I've been following Penguin Poets, just out of curiosity, that there's a book coming out soon by a poet called Rio Cortez, called Golden Axe. And so I pre-ordered it on my Kobo, promptly forget about it, and then so it comes into my Kobo this morning, and I go and I think to myself, is this possible? I go back to that photo of the 2015 Emerging Poets Fellowship, and who do you think is standing there but Rio Cortez? Actually, right next to Paul Tran, if I'm not mistaken. So this is really a testament to the power of fellowship groups, workshops. It's absolutely astonishing. So 7 years later, all three of them in the same year have been published by Penguin. It's pretty exciting. By the by, just out of interest, because it's so lovely, I looked at the photos of the other years of the fellowship, and who do you think is sitting in a chair, smiling shyly at the camera from the 2013 fellowship? None other than Ocean Vuong. Little baby poet Ocean Vuong. So sweet. Who could ever imagine that he would be world famous in 2022? So this just made my day. And I decided, okay, I'm going to read Rio Cortez. I'm really into it. And Golden Axe, I'm pleased to say that I absolutely adored it. I couldn't think of a better book to finish off the Sealey Challenge with. It's her first book, which is actually amazing. amazing. I would not think it was her first. It is first and foremost a unique, new, fresh style that is all her own. She has a particular way of looking at her own personal history, her ancestors, looking at her present and her future, as she describes in her very brief preface. Her family goes back to Louisiana, where they were enslaved, and she's Black. And once her great-great-grandfather, I may be mistaken, but once he was freed, he made his way west to, of all places, Utah. And so so that is where her family settled, and she grew up there. And so she grew up in an environment where she felt she was obviously not the same as most of the people around her, but she didn't understand how her family got there. And so she, at the time, being young, thought of it as perhaps being due to aliens landing. That is how alien she felt in that community. And of course, the Latter-day Saints are there in Utah, and one of her ancestors joined them. And that brings up some historical facts that I was completely unaware of. I'll talk about that later as far as the racism within the Latter-day Saints. So, but back to the poetry. She's got 3 sections. The first section introduces her ancestors and her girlhood. And Broad Axe was the name of an African-American newspaper that started in around 1895 in Utah, around the same time when her family arrived there. So I think that's the connection with, among other reasons for the title, with the title Golden Axe. And she's clearly tried to do a lot of research in many different ways, as she says in one of the poems, using everything on the table that she's able to. And she uses a pamphlet from the 1950s that she discovered and mentions, and she also uses her great-great-aunt's self-published book. Now, this is all background, and you do need to know that, but she describes that. And then now going back to this idea that aliens landed, and that's how little Rio Cortez arrived, or her family arrived. She plays with this idea of time travel and space travel in science fiction in fascinating ways that are very powerful, very moving, and actually really truly interesting. In her preface, she describes her work as being, I'll actually quote, she says, "The poems in this book reflect the outward and earthly landscapes of the Afro frontier and the inner cosmic imagination of the Afro pioneer." So the Afro pioneerism and Afro frontierism are ideas, categories, historical facts that really capture for her what her family is. And there are ways that she talks about the history of the slavery in her family, the problems within the family when one member decided that they wanted to be part of the Latter-day Saints community. And then in the second and third sections, she starts to talk about Well, in the second section, she's then an adult. She's moved to New York. She's living in Harlem. She has a partner, from what I can tell, and she discusses popular culture. She presents a popular culture, especially films and television shows, and twists them and adds the Black element to show again how alien she still is in this community, in this world. And it's very, very effective. In the last section, she's now, I believe, married, and then she has a baby who then grows to be a toddler. And she talks about different issues like motherhood and trying to find a home for herself. She brings in some references to music. I'm looking at my notes. There's so much, and of course I can't summarize all of it. But underlying all of it, despite the horrible fact that, that are historical facts that Black Americans have had to deal with, and she has had to deal with, despite all of that, she still is able to somehow understand and own that identity and history and make it her own unique structure, in a way, almost as if she's constructing a world. And sometimes her identity is split, and there's two Rio Cortezes. Sometimes an apparition or a ghost of an ancestor may arrive in her room, but it's always a surprise. It's always fresh. It's always seeing the world through Rio Cortez's eyes, and the poetry I found to be sublime. Now, quickly going back to something that's of interest to me in particular, she has a poem about Cain and the mark of Cain, and I didn't realize, but the Latter-day Saints, and I think possibly other Christian groups, I don't know very much about Christianity, and this is why this was so important to me. I didn't realize that they used, and still do to a certain point, the idea of the mark of Cain from the book of Genesis to refer to Black people, especially Black Americans, who, because their skin is dark, that is the mark of Cain, and therefore they cannot be priests. That is why they cannot do certain very important functions within the church. I hadn't realized that, and now, having read this poem, I realized how much I missed, like a huge amount that I missed when I was talking about Cain Named the Animals by Shane McRae. It was a mystery to me what the connection between his poems was and Cain and Abel. I had Cain and Abel in my mind from my Jewish day school. We never learned about a mark of Cain being connected to anything like that. So the shock of finding that out, the horror that can be used in a religion, that knowledge came through a poem, but it was never like on the nose. It was never obvious. It was never didactic. It was actually the fact that I was immersed in Rio Cortez's autobiography and her unique way of seeing herself and her family, that the facts opened up as well to me. And I think that's something very special that she's been able to do. I admire her a great deal. I thank her for this book. And I thank you for playing along with me as I have gone through the 31 days of the Sealey Challenge. It's been an amazing experience. I talked throughout the videos, especially the last few, about what the Sealey Challenge has meant to me. It's meant the world to me. I hope to do it again next year. I feel it's a bittersweet ending because I actually know what I'm going to read tomorrow, even though I don't have to. I mean, I never had to. I'm already looking forward. I'm actually going to read a book by Simone White, who I just read about. So I might do a video. I might take a break, but in any case, I'm pretty sure I'll be coming back here to talk about prose as well. I'm missing prose in my life because it's been all about the poetry. But finally, I'd just like to thank Nicole Sealey because, I guess about a month, 2 months, maybe 2 months ago, I chose her book. Before I knew about the Sealey Challenge, I chose her book to discuss in the Contemporary Poets series, which, I have a playlist for it. And I really enjoyed that book. I really enjoyed her book. And that's how I found out about the Sealey Challenge, if I'm not mistaken. And it's brought so much, and especially because, you can do any books. You can choose any books. You have total freedom. I mean, you have total freedom, of course. But Nicole Sealey does encourage you to look for books written by living poets, and also by poets who you may not immediately gravitate towards. And so my horizon has opened. My experience of poetry reading has tripled, quadrupled. And so, thank you to all the poets that I read, most of them living and still writing. I feel like there's a community of all of them in my mind now. And sometimes they even talk to each other. I'll find myself, especially in the last week or two, I found myself reading one book and immediately going back to another book that I'd read earlier for the challenge because they seem to talk to each other, to speak to each other. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. But most important of all, don't forget, the only real property is the property of the mind. Okay, bye.